Today, we would like to show you some of the new features and that we have in our upcoming release, which will definitely be a great help and might even change completely how you plan to do your migration. Now, if we look at a normal setup where you want to start creating test cases for your different interfaces that you need, what we had so far is that we say, okay, you might go ahead and plan a migration from PI, and you might have a bunch of PI interfaces, operation mappings here used for B2B. And for this, you can then say, well, once this has been migrated, you can then also migrate existing test cases that you might have created here, where you say, okay, for all of this, we can then um, repeat the test in the integration suite and see if there are any gaps. But what if you don't have this test repository, or maybe you don't even have a PI system? What is the process then? And here we have a new feature that we would like to show. And to begin with, I just want to show that for this test, I will do a complete new setup of a new Figaf agent. In this case, it's going to be the one called Demo B2B. And that means that this test will basically be, or demonstration will basically be like you had a completely new Figaf installation. So if you start with a new Figaf installation, you can go, for example, here to your B2B menu. And then if we select our new agent, you will see that there is nothing in here. It's completely empty. There are no objects, no nothing. And similar, if we go then to our tracked objects for the same agent, completely empty, there is nothing there. So the first thing that we need to do is to do a synchronization and make sure that now this agent is also known in Figaf with all of the content. I trigger a synchronization, and in this case I said, let's take everything. You can take design objects or TPI objects, but we will just TPM objects, but we will take everything. Synchronize. Synchronization has begun. And synchronization completed. Now, I did a little clever editing here because you might notice here that this initial synchronization actually took almost 8 minutes. And I thought there was no need for all of us to sit and wait for that. But I can tell you now, after this first initial synchronization, the subsequent incremental synchronizations goes much, much faster, of course. So now everything has been updated. A few notes here. What you might have noticed is that you can see, for example, we have message implementation guides. There's 64 of them. But we can see we've created now 158 new versions. Why that? Because, excuse me, there might be different versions of the implementation guidelines. It's so you might have version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's like only 24 definitions, but there might be a total of 100, or there are a total of 158 versions. And similar for the mapping guidelines. So all mapping guidelines, all implementation guidelines, mix and max, are also stored in Figaf, versioned and locked and tracked. And also, as we see here, it's not a nothing system we have. We have over 2,500 iFlows. There's a bunch of things in here. So this is now finished, which means that now we can see all of our content in tracked objects. And it also means that we can go down to our B2B scenarios. And now also for B2B, our demo B2B, our new agent, we can now see all of our agreements. So we have them all listed here. And part of what I want to show you is that, well, let's say, for example, we are interested in uploading a bunch of test data. We don't have a PI system. We don't have test cases ready. And what you can see here is what I've prepared is a compiled list here of 529 unique EDI orders. So all of these are unique. Go in here and see everything is unique in here. The interchange numbers. This could be also for different partners, for different receivers, for different company codes for our sake, and so on. So we have all of these inbound test messages. And we then also have way down here all of the correlating result messages, our IDOCs that we know. So this comes from an old system. We might have this stocked as in some archive, or these might be provided by a van provider that has managed this task for us in the past. But now we have all these files, both in and out files, and we have then compiled all of them here into one unique zip where we say, okay, now we have all of these unique messages. So how do we get from that and into our new TPM system? Now, we can quickly create a template, an agreement for these partners that we have. We can define our companies, we can define our partners, and especially here in Figaf, via the fast track of create new partner, creating a new partner with all the needed identifiers and so on takes a minute. So that is very easily and quickly done. Similar, you can create subsidiaries. If you want to say, I want to have unique company codes, I want one for every single country, you can very quickly here create a new subsidiary and have everything in place. So then also in your TPI system, you might then have defined all of your agreement templates, and then you can also create your agreements. Now, your agreements don't have to really do anything. I mean, you hardly need a mapping. You can just create a template, an agreement, and then say, okay, this is basically what we want to exchange with some partners. But how we do the conversion or something is might something we want to do at a later stage. But before starting all that, you then say, well, how do I test if this works? No matter what, as we start our implementation, however we do it, how can I test if it's working, all of these? And here you can see that what we have here listed in our test cases, we can see which of the agreements have been activated, edited, or whatever, or need require an update. But we can also see that none of them, of course, have any test cases within this agent. So for our new demo B2B, we have no test cases for any of these scenarios. Now, what I have compiled here was a bunch of EDIFACT orders. So if I take the 98A, and we can see here we have a bunch of sender inbound EDIFACT orders. And we can see we have multiple different partners that are using this. And we can also see that one of them is actually using a Mac. But still, again, there are 0 test cases for any of them. I will now then say, if I start by taking, and let's say we start with bestseller Finland, and we are interested in the communication to Austria. Now, we have a button up here called Create Test Case. You can then now go directly and say, okay, for this agreement, and the agreement is immediately selected, you can now say, I want to create now EDIFACT orders 98A test cases. I have selected and I said, I'm interested in this specific agreement. You can also specify a default scenario. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit more detail later what the point is, but here is the point that you select a placeholder. So this is basically a test case placeholder where I would then say I've created one for Figaf here and say this is for inbound messages for Figaf. I select this and I'll show in a short while why this is relevant. You can also say then, okay, for which of my agents do I want to do this? I will just get rid of a few, but say, okay, I am still interested in doing it in our new B2B new demo agent, but I also have other agents that I then say, okay, maybe this test case would also be relevant for those, especially like if you have a test system and say, okay, I want to do this in my development system, but I maybe also want to, of course, run the test in my test system. Good. So this has been defined. Now, what do we do in here? Here we have the option of saying you can now upload an archive file with all of your test data. So here I then go and select what we had before, where I then said, here are my 524 EDIFACT orders 98A, and I open that. Here I can also set that, yes, if I have done the configuration and assigned an calculated order number, where I then via expressions find the order number and track that also as part of the recording of the test case, then I can then forcible say that I want to do here. But again, this could be a list of many different messages that you want to test and send in. So I'm now ready to do this and then say, let's create test cases. The processing begins, and then you see immediately here are the results. Now, if we look at this, we had the 524 messages inside our compiled zip file. 42 of them matches the scenario that I've specified and says I'm interested in this scenario. So I already have 42 test cases that instantly can be created for just this one scenario. Then it says that there are 10 messages in all of these 524 that doesn't match any scenarios. And I did that. I put some messages in there just to show, well, there might be a case where you don't have an agreement in place for this message. But then we can see that for the rest of all these messages, there are scenarios in place and say, okay, there are scenarios. It's a different one than the one you selected, but there are all of these other scenarios where there are also test messages for. So you get a full list here of saying, okay, now we have these two options. We can say, okay, I only want to create my 42 test cases for the one scenario I selected. Because maybe you have that and say, okay, I just want to now have a test for my specific scenario. I don't want a lot of other things. This is all I want for now. But you can also say, suppress this warning and just say, yes, create all the test cases that you can. Everything that we see here, just create everything of it. And then what happens to what's not found? And this is where we come back to the default. Those will now be assigned to the default iFlow agreement, the scenario that you specified and said, okay, for that one, I want then these um, unknown or not found messages to then be created as test cases under that scenario. So I'm just going to say now suppress and just upload everything. And what it will do is that it will instantly create all of the test cases, and it will then open the one test case for the one I specified to begin with. And in this case, this was bestseller Finland going to our subsidiary for Aloha Austria. And I can then go in here and see the messages that have been created. And you can see all of them now get a technical key, but you can see here, for example, now that we have the unique order ID, the purchase order number for every single one of them listed here. So it's very transparent exactly what's going on. And of course, we have 0 test results, but you can then say, okay, I want to now execute this and run this immediately. You can pick which agent you want, then the system you want to do it in. I want to do it for my new B2B, demo B2B. So I select that, and the test case is now executed. Do you want to open results? Sure. And now it's been sent, and we can also go over to our integration suite. And if I just jump down in my B2B here, little cheat for me because that's a quick way to open my integration suite. I just open one of those. Then in the integration suite, I can go to monitoring and look at B2B. And we can see there's been a lot of messages here. And now we can see all of our test cases have been processed through here. Which also means that, and this was for bestseller here, and if you look at the overview, now you see all of the test cases suddenly have been created. That we can see we had one down here where there was 162 messages, 109. All of these different ones have been now assigned to the respective scenarios, and you can go in here then and say, okay, fine, this Colgate, let's just open this test case, and you can run that as well and say, okay, run that again in my B2B, and this is also executed. And if we go back to our original test here of for Finland, we can go into here and look at the test results. And now I'm just going to poll for result messages. And that's then completed. Close that. And we can then go and look at the results. And then here we can see again from our test overview, we can see all of our order numbers, our unique order numbers for every single one of our test cases. And we can go in and get a error analysis. And here we can see precisely the differences. And what might be interesting is saying like, okay, the IDOC number is now being differently populated, but we can also say, well, in this case, that doesn't matter because it's not really used for inbound IDOCs. So that we can just ignore and say that's fine. We can see that the test indicator is specifically not mapped here, which is an overruling map because in a test system, the TPM will automatically set a test indicator, and maybe you don't want that. So that has been removed or suppressed specifically, and we can then say, okay, that is not a problem. The creation date and creation times are, of course, different. Did I pick this one? Yes. So it was the creation time here. And then we can see the interchange numbers were not mapped in our actual result, like this is the input file that we had as an example, and we said, well, that we are fine with, that's just fine that this is now being mapped. So we accept both of them. We can then go on and say, are there more differences than that? And then, yes, you see down here, we then also get to the position number. Oops, now I'm jumping around a little bit. So we can see here leading zeros have been removed. So this is something where maybe we can then say, okay, we need to test with the business. Is this a problem that the position number has changed? Is this something or not? Or if it's not, then we can say, okay, that is not a problem, that's allowed, or we could change the mapping if that was the case. But after doing all of this and saying, well, basically we were okay with everything that was in there, I check again, and we can see that there's also the IDOC release number, and that we can say, yeah, okay, that is not populated today, but that is also not a problem that that is not in there. So those are all sort of technical details that are not needed. And I still have an error. No, I just need to do a full comparison. And now we can see everything is success, and our test is success. And we can go back and do a refresh here. And now we have a successful execution of our entire test case of 42 unique test messages that we just uploaded and attached to this one scenario. And which means again that over here, going from having absolutely zero tests for all of these scenarios, we now suddenly have a bunch of tests, and they are good, solid, big tests of 162 messages. And just to show that if we look at our order response and we say, well, in this case, we are also interested in, for example, looking at this here and say, okay, can I also create test case for this? It's just the same. We now we can create a new one for order resp, and we can then again specify our input file. In this case, I prepared one smaller one, but just to show you how it works. Again, I can then select my default if I want that and say, yes, I have for outbound also a placeholder I want to use. And I can then create my test cases. And in this case, you can see that out of the 6 messages, 5 of them were assigned to my scenario. So that's perfect. And one didn't match. And here's the detail about why it didn't match. And that is then going to be assigned to the um, default flow. But we now have a test case here where we can see with all our messages, which bring us back to the overview. Now suddenly this one scenario has a valid test case that can be used for validating any mapping changes, and can be used also as part of the change management process once you start transporting all of your TPM configurations and mappings. That's the demonstration of a new feature. We're very excited about it. We see this as a big game changer in how quickly to get the B2B implementation in the integration suite up and running with a full test supporting. Thank you.